Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Commuting Solutions membership meeting. My name is Audrey DeBarros, and I'm the Executive Director of Commuting Solutions. We are grateful for your time this morning, and we're really pleased to provide this opportunity for our coalition surrounding several transportation funding and policy issues that are pressing and timely, recognizing its importance to the economic vitality, connectivity, and mobility of the Northwest Metro region. We're pleased to provide you with this learning opportunity today. But before we get started, we just wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping items to make sure our meeting runs smoothly. When you have a moment, if you aren't presenting with us, if you could please mute yourself and turn off your camera just to make things run smoothly and to reduce distractions during the meeting. We will provide time for question and answer via the chat as time allows. So please add your questions there, and we'll definitely get to them if we have time to cover them. And I wanted to let you know we are recording this meeting, and we'll be posting the video to our website in the next day or so. So thanks again for attending our general membership meeting made possible by our 2021 presenting sponsor, Boulder County. I would also like to recognize our gold sponsors, the Colorado High Performance Transportation Enterprise, Elevations Credit Union, the Northwest Chamber Alliance, Google, and the RTD. The rest of our 2021 sponsors were included in the slideshow at the beginning of the event. We greatly appreciate your generous support of Commuting Solutions. If this is your first time attending a membership meeting, Commuting Solutions is a nonprofit organization who serves as the Transportation Management Organization, or TMO, for the Northwest region. And this is a role that we have proudly served for more than 22 years to bring together public, private, and nonprofit sector stakeholders regarding mobility needs in this region. And we are also a proud member of the DRCOG Way to Go TDM partnership, working together with 8 other TMOs and the Denver Regional Council of Governments to reduce traffic congestion and improve our air quality in the Denver region. And boy, do we know what an issue that has been as of late. Again, thank you for joining us here today. It's an exciting time to be working in transportation, as there is thrilling momentum building at a federal, state, regional, and local level. At a federal level, there are 2 transportation funding bills that are currently being considered, one in the Senate and one in the House, both of which include 2 different projects that would fund a component of the State Highway 119 multimodal corridor improvements. We appreciate the support of Representative Neguse and of Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett in particular for their support to include earmarks and appropriations requests for the 119 corridor. And in addition, the city of Longmont recently submitted a US DOT RAISE grant application that would reconstruct the 119 and Hoover intersection into a multimodal intersection to make it much more safer and to provide mobility choices for all. We do appreciate the hard work of our partners locally, regionally, state, and federally for the tremendous strides that are currently underway to improve multimodal transportation in the metro region and in the state of Colorado. And we're pleased to have a few of those folks here with us today. So on that note, I'd like to get us started by welcoming CDOT's Executive Director, Shoshana Liu, and Rebecca White, the Director of Division of Transportation Development for the DOT. And we're pleased to have both of them here to talk about the first tranche of Senate Bill 260 funding that was recently awarded to many projects throughout Colorado, 2 of which were in our region, which we're greatly appreciative for, and what's coming up next to continue selecting projects for the next round of projects identified in the 10-year project list. And then in addition, CDOT just yesterday released draft rulemaking for the greenhouse gas transportation budget, which were included in Governor Polis's greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap to address transportation's impacts on emissions. And his plan, Governor Polis's plan, established targets for reducing greenhouse gases by 26% by the year 2025, 50% by the year 2030, and 90% by the year 2050 from 2005 levels. So you must know, or I'm sure you know, that transportation is the largest contributing factor to climate change. So this is a very important rule that our state is contemplating. So I'd like to welcome Shoshana and Rebecca to provide us with a summary of these two upcoming major priorities for CDOT. Welcome.
Thank you, Audrey. So we had some slides, but Audrey, if it's okay, I'd like to deviate a little bit from the slide deck and talk a little bit to the pressing issues, because when we scheduled this, I don't think we realized how fortuitous the timing would be relative to proposing the rule yesterday, and would love to start with that if that's okay. Does that work for you?
Absolutely. Do you want us to share those slides, or did you just want to cover it verbally?
I think I would be great to share the slides because there's a lot of information, but I think for at least the first few minutes, I'd like to just sort of start by talking about yesterday, and then how that fits into the conversation about projects and how we think about the next tranche of the 10-year plan. So
okay, we're prepared to pull up your decks however you would like, so just let us know.
Okay, so kind of stepping back, I think it's important to start with the timing of this rule, right? I mean, it's everyone on this call probably knows that we've had a hard couple of weeks at CDOT for all of the obvious reasons, and I think a week or two ago, there was a conversation about, given all of the kind of time and sort of necessary diversion of focus that was going into dealing with the crisis at hand, could we sustain amongst ourselves keeping this rule on the schedule that we had talked about with the proposal coming out when it did? And, I think we amongst ourselves sort of thought about it and said, we have to move mountains to get this rule out on time, because it's just too much of a confluence of reminding us why we need to do it. I mean, the situations we've been dealing with over the last 2 weeks collectively, whether it's the deep resiliency challenges that, come to light in a very visceral way with Glenwood Canyon, or, all of us looking out the window and, being able to see the air quality impacts we're facing. Like we're just at a moment where we need to sort of face up to the reason why we have to take on this policy with respect to pollution reduction planning. And we felt like the urgency of it just made it all the more important that we stay on our schedule. And I just wanted to start by kind of articulating that it was it was something we felt very strongly about, not to let the disaster response part of our lives delay coming out with this proposal for what I think is potentially a very transformative policy for all of us. The proposal that we released yesterday follows on months of work and will be followed by months more. This is something where if we can get it right in Colorado, we have a chance to be really at the forefront of the nation in answering that question of how do we sort of own up to the consequences of the things that we build in infrastructure and the impact that has on air quality, on pollution, on smog, on greenhouse gases, and the impacts on climate change, but how do we kind of be proactive about it in a way where we make our infrastructure be part of the solution in a way that's very specific and very real? This obviously complements all of the work that's happening in Colorado, nationwide, globally around electric vehicles, and, cleaner vehicles is in some ways the fastest thing we can do to reduce pollution from the transportation sector, which has become #1 in Colorado as nationwide. But that alone isn't going to give us the kind of clean transportation sector that we need. And what this rule, this standard that was proposed yesterday, tries to tackle is that question about the interface between the built environment and the sustainability of our system, and how we work those cleaner vehicles and transportation technologies into a built environment that nurtures them and that is complementary, to all of the other steps that are being taken, again, both in Colorado and federally. We were very pleased, obviously, that Senate Bill 260, took a major step forward on putting funding into electrification, both on the electrification charging side and in terms of equity with respect to rolling stock. We're hopeful that the federal government will supplement that if and when they pass some form of the package that's circulating. And all of those things are really important to being able to make the investments that we need, to double down on zero emission vehicles as quickly as possible. But that said, even the cleanest cars and the cleanest trucks still have an impact on the environment. And, making sure that we, create a system statewide where we have the ability to use less with respect to driving is something that really falls, in our view, on the agencies that have purview over transportation planning and infrastructure itself, starting with us. So the policy that was proposed yesterday essentially sets kind of target levels, both statewide and for the major MPO areas, and kind of sets for each entity. And this is essentially recipients and subrecipients of the federal dollars and state dollars, a target that has to be hit for greenhouse gas pollution in coming from infrastructure, essentially. What it does, the intent is really to make it easier to make those investments that we know can help. So, all of the things that this coalition has supported for a long time, really trying to make sure that multimodal transportation is part and parcel of everything that we do, in transportation planning, that we think about the solutions that are coming from, local governments across the state that are really best practices, and make sure that those are woven into the way that we look at planning writ large. So, the standard proposes these targets, but it also sets up a process of how to get to them, right? And it's not intended to be just, either you hit it, and if you don't, that's the end of it, but rather, if a plan, whether it's CDOT's plan through the state or, or the MPO strategies, doesn't hit the target, what do you do to get there? And what the standard sets out is that, in the event that an entity is out of compliance, you have the opportunity to get there, by a couple of different mechanisms, one of which is shifting projects around so that they model as having lesser impact, and the other is by applying a suite of mitigations. And one of the things that that is sort of set out structurally in this proposed standard that will be fleshed out over the months to come is both a list of mitigations and a process for identifying things that we sort of know through common sense and modeling help us to get at the problem of air pollution and climate change, while also really facilitating things that improve quality of life and options for consumers. So examples of that in real specific terms, right? Adding bus rapid transit into a highway project, right? Something that we're increasingly doing at CDOT. Something that, when we talk a little bit about the 267, 260 list, is something that we've increasingly prioritized when we do build highway projects. Making investments that facilitate sort of stronger downtowns and make it easier to have a multimodal experience, within a community. So, that's everything from safer crosswalks, to the kinds of things we've all worked on together through the Main Streets programs, to supporting policies that kind of reward local governments for zoning policies that facilitate more density and multi-use. First and last mile connection to transit, all of those things are things that we think will fit on that mitigation list. And the goal is to sort of set up an illustrative list of mitigations to start with, begin to model them immediately, but also welcome all the best ideas that we can get from our partners, so that this list becomes a living document of ways that we sort of know we can accelerate solutions that help with both fighting climate change and improving quality of life in communities. For those who have spent a lot of time in the regulatory space, we're thinking about this mitigations list as something that is modeled off the off-cycle credit menu in the EPA regulatory space. So, kind of a pre-approved list of best practices that can help to solve the problems, but also something where there's a procedure for adding new things as innovation continues. So that's something that is kind of kicked off with this proposed standard that will be refined through the final process, but also will be a living policy process with a lot of back and forth between all of the planning partners. The idea is that, with the combination of modeling projects and modeling mitigations, our hope is that both we and the MPO plans, hit these targets. But if they don't, and hearing from a lot of folks that having an enforcement mechanism was an important part of making this policy real. What the proposed rule would do is, in the event that there is not compliance, it wouldn't take money away from anybody, but it would take the sub-allocated federal dollars that flow to MPOs, as well as the dollars that go into CDOT's capital plan, and restrict the use so that they have to be used on approved mitigations. So it doesn't take the dollars away. It doesn't even take away the ability to have choice about how the dollars get spent, but it limits the universe of how dollars are allocated to things that are kind of demonstrated through a process that CDOT works through with air regulators to have a mitigation benefit. And again, for those who have worked in other parts of transportation regulations, what this mimics is a procedure in the Federal Highway Administration safety regs, where if you're out of compliance with your safety target, a portion of your dollars get restricted to what are called proven safety solutions. And the idea is to use a very similar model. So, for those who have operated in the world of Title 23 highway dollars, our hope is that this is kind of a familiar construct that's replicable and operable, in part because it follows something that's a practice that exists in another part of the federal policies with respect to safety. I think that the combination of those is intended to, both start a very specific conversation about what these mitigations are and make it easier to implement them, right? I mean, once something ends up on that list of mitigations, the idea is that it will be much easier for, those best practices to be replicated. So, my hope is that this, has the effect of really taking things that are best practices and magnifying the extent to which they get applied in plans, and facilitating, kind of a hopper of cost benefit analysis about, which of these practices can help us facilitate a cleaner transportation sector. So that's kind of the policy in a nutshell. Rebecca, anything before we move on that you would want to reference with respect to the standard?
Just to note that, this, because it is a draft rule, I think that's it's a really important opportunity to weigh in over the next 60 days. We've got at least 8 hearings scheduled around the state, and we're accepting written comment at any time. So is it as significant as this proposal is? For a lot of reasons, I just encourage everyone to take a look at that and engage with us through either the hearings or the written comment.
That's absolutely, and I think we would rather err on the side of more consultation with partners on this. So if there's an opportunity to have a conversation about it that we haven't thought of, let us know, because this is only going to work if we really talk through the details at the front end, and really sort of build it from the bottom up, as we have endeavored to do over the past months, and will continue to do through it being finalized. And again, this. I think we're at the cutting edge of a problem that people across the country and the world are trying to tackle right now. We've been in close touch with the federal regulators about the fact that we're doing this. I think, the Federal Highway Administration is tracking Colorado closely on this because they're trying to figure out what to do in this space as well. And I think, we have the opportunity to together create a model that could really influence how we tackle pollution in the built environment, not just in the state, but across the country. And, I think that really gives us a chance to, to lead and to test and to sort of figure out how we refine this in a way that works for us, but also potentially sort of shapes our destiny as this problem, gets tackled more broadly. And, I don't think it's a matter of if, but rather when, in terms of when there become a broader suite of policies trying to get at emissions relative to the built environment. So, I think it's exciting for us to be at the cutting edge, and we hope that everybody will sort of join us in this journey of finalizing the policy in a way that works for all of us.
Thank you, Shoshana. That's really, we're really excited for this opportunity and appreciate the work that CDOT has implemented for the past several months to gain input to get to this point. So, and having plenty of time over the next 2 months to weigh in and provide that input that you're asking for. Just in the spirit of time, would you like us to pull up the slide deck regarding the project selection process that's coming up for 260? Would that work for you?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for keeping us on schedule. We could go on about the pollution reduction planning for hours.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and
Yeah.
it is exciting to be on the cusp of the
Yeah.
frontier and this new national opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you. So I think folks have probably read the breakdown of Senate Bill 260. So let's talk a little bit about project selection, because I think that's a more refined use of our time together this morning, and we can certainly double back on all of the background if needed. So I think the next slide. All right, well, while we're finding the slide, to talk a little bit about the last, where we are in the project selection process, and and also how it fits with the policy that's brought forth relative to this regulatory process we're undertaking. Senate Bill 260 had within it a component of funds that were part of the state stimulus. And what we've tried to balance is pushing forward the projects that are stimulus projects to try and get shovels in the ground while we're at this moment of economic recovery, while recognizing that we have a good problem of being towards the end of our 4-year list for the 10-year plan, and we need to have a kind of slightly slower process to determine what goes on the next 4-year list as we do a couple of things in parallel. So the last month, the Transportation Commission approved a set of projects that were sort of a combination of rounding out the 4-year list and taking on a few things that were on the 10-year list, but that had also been identified as high priorities, both in the stimulus requests to the legislature, and also, candidly making sure that we have a more multimodal mix. And I know that the next topic is the NAM's top tier projects. And, I think for us, as we think about our investments in Northern Colorado, making sure that we are being multifold in the way that we complement the pursuit of those NAM's corridors and getting transit on them is something that we're trying to be at the cutting edge on. So the projects that were approved last month, again, there's a little bit of confusion, I think, about some of the big projects on the 4-year list relative to some of the smaller ones that are on the 6 through 10-year list that we accelerated in large part due to the kind of physical urgency of them becoming more pressing. But, the projects that were on the 4-year list still are. Floyd Hill, we actually just put out the environmental assessment, which includes some really exciting mitigations that include a micro transit service that we're working on in real time, a whole lot of wildlife crossings, improvements to the bike path, and several other things. But that we are working through the steps to be able to to get that project into delivery as soon as possible. But because it's such a big project, and because there are there's reasonably more environmental process around it, we haven't let the contract yet because we're just getting the steps in order. The year 3 list for 267 had all of the initial commitment that was in the 267 1 through 4 list for Floyd Hill, so the money's there. We're working towards the initial steps that we put out on the RFP process to sort of begin to see who might be interested, ask the question of what it would cost to deliver just deliver it in 2 increments versus delivering it all at once, and we're working through that. And I think candidly, that's an area where if the federal funding that we're sort of starting to see comes in, there's a really good chance that we end up just doing the whole project at once, which wasn't funded in the years 1 through 4 list, only part of it was. But if we can, figure out a path at the front end to be able to deliver it all together, there may be efficiency benefits in doing that. So that's moving, and it's moving quickly. And getting the environmental documents finalized and out has been something that we've all considered an area of focus in the last month or two. And we're moving at pace, and more to come on that, in even the next few weeks. 270, we are working on completing the environmental assessment, and to the extent that we have not put out the EA yet, it is only because we're trying to make sure that we really dot our I's and cross our T's, and working closely with the community, especially on the EJ issues that are involved in that project, right? We know there's a lot of sensitivity around what it looks like and the footprint and how it's delivered, and we're trying to make sure that we really dig deep on talking with the neighbors about what the project will look like before we put out an EA. So, we have every expectation of moving forward. We've budgeted for it, both in anticipating the next year of 267, and also in thinking through the financing because of proposing a toll lane that will help finance the project. But, we really want to make sure we do it right, knowing especially that we've heard loud and clear that there's a lot of concerns about the project. So that's sort of the status on the two big ones. Neither of them is being sidelined. It's just that because they're bigger projects, there's more process that goes into making them happen, and that's underway. In terms of the projects that were in the 3B list, the 3B list, which is what the commission approved last month, supplemented the 267 year 3 list that had already been approved. So most of the projects one would be expecting to see were on the 3 list, and the 3B in some ways was a mix of rounding out that 4-year tranche and also delivering some of the key stimulus projects that had been identified in the request of the legislature. One of those, that is one of the bigger ones, is urgent fixes on the Eisenhower Tunnel. And so again, I know I had heard that there were some rumors about the tunnel projects displacing Floyd Hill. That's just not the case. It's only that, unfortunately, some of the things that need fixing on Eisenhower have gotten a lot more urgent in the last year or two. And, sadly, we've seen from Glenwood Canyon, just how bad it can be when one of the points of critical failure on I-70 goes down, and we're trying to get ahead of having problems that we didn't anticipate. So, the investments in the tunnel were something we had specifically highlighted in the administration's stimulus request to the legislature. And the reason we made it more urgent is because the team that does the asset management on the tunnel started waving the flag that there's fixes that we just need to get ahead of to not have the tunnel go down unexpectedly. So, so that's what that tranche was. We have kind of a red light, green light, yellow light list of how urgent tunnel fixes are. So this is intended to get the most urgent things that need fixing off the docket so that we can, do what we need to do to keep the tunnel functional. In terms of other things that I think are probably of interest to this group on the 3B list, we moved forward one piece of the State Highway 7 multimodal corridor, and, just to clarify one thing, the idea on that was in no way to move it ahead of 119, but rather to make sure that we're tackling the top tier NAMS projects as a kind of collective high priority. We've been working with the 119 team. We had a great meeting a couple of weeks ago about what the substance of the next request on 119 is. I expect for that to be on the next list that moves forward. Now that we've identified specifically what those are, CDOT is, all behind the grant request the folks put in. So we see, really getting to a delivery of multimodal service on those top tier NAMS projects that are in the 10-year plan to be, be both timely and, deeply embedded in this conversation about how to have more climate solutions that we're talking about. Those are exactly the kinds of projects we need to be accelerating right now. And, to the extent that that one, I think, was probably, happened faster on the 10-year plan than some were expecting to, the message we were trying to send is that we don't have a moment to waste on getting these multimodal projects in the 10-year plan moving. In terms of what comes next on the 10-year plan, one of the commitments that is required of us in Senate Bill 260 and that we've reinforced in the pollution standard that was proposed yesterday is that if we're going to be asking anybody to model their project list in the next year or two, CDOT has to be first in line. So we're going to be working on what's sort of the next 4-year tranche of projects, and making sure that we model it and we're transparent about how it models against the rule that we're putting in place. So what you can expect to see from us over the next couple of months is a back and forth where there will be multiple opportunities for comment and dialogue with all of you about what that next 4-year packet of projects looks like, but also an exercise of modeling it against our own rule. So, candidly, for the 3B projects, we were very mindful of having a set of projects that we didn't think would increase our GHG footprint. A very heavy focus on multimodal and state of good repair, knowing that those things don't have the kind of induced demand implications that some other kinds of projects do. And we were trying to thread a delicate needle there to make sure that we were sort of saving the harder conversations about modeling for that 4-year project list where we'll be able to show, our own process of complying with the new policy. So that's going to be a process that takes a few months. It's going to involve, opportunities for comment, opportunities for dialogue as part of the conversation around the rule, but also separate, and a proposed list where we take it out for comment and solicit feedback before we finalize it. So, you know, as I think Rebecca said very eloquently last month, there were some things that we had to move fast because of the stimulus dollars, but part of the reason we moved the sort of shovel-ready project list fast was to be able to take a little bit more time with this next step. Rebecca, what did I miss?
That was a good overview of what's next. You know, I appreciate that this slide is up because it shows that you know, one of the advantages of Senate Bill 260 is it provided a great deal of certainty for us and what we sort of formally considered year 4 of Senate Bill 267, which is that 4th year of the certificates of participation. So you see that sort of high bar there in fiscal year 22, knowing that those dollars are coming in, and not only are we able to fully deliver all 4 years of the plan, but then start looking into the out years. So what we'd like to do is like Director Liu said, look at those next few fiscal years and create our next sort of checklist. But to do that with a lot of input and working with stakeholders across the state to do that. And then the other beautiful part about Senate Bill 260 is you see that real leveling off of a predictable stream of revenue, which is every transportation planner's dream. So that's where our 10-year plan and having that long-term vision in place is a helpful document as well. So Audrey, I know we're at time on your agenda, and I don't know if there was any questions, but thank you.
Thank you both for joining us here today. I would be remiss if I did not thank all of the CDOT team for your fast and furious work to open I-70 through the Glenwood Canyon. Please pass along our sentiments. You all did a wonderful job to get society moving very quickly in a very, very dangerous situation. So thank you so much for acting on our behalf so quickly. I would also be remiss if I didn't thank you for the $25 million that has been committed to the NAMS corridors, one being the mobility hub at State Highway 7 or CO7 and I-25, as well as the 95th Street CO7 intersection. So we very much appreciate that initial onset of funding from 260, which directly benefits our community and our regional transportation priorities. So we would love to have you back in the future. I know these are big conversations that are happening, so I'll stay in touch with you and wish you well. And again, thank you for your collaboration with our region.
Well, thank you. And we would love to take you up on the opportunity to talk again, you know, even in a few weeks, because there's a lot of really important things moving fast right now, and making sure that there's a live dialogue about them is going to be really important over the next couple of months. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, well then, turning our attention to another regional partner is the RTD. We are pleased to have with us Chris Quinn, who is our project manager for the Northwest Metro region, as well as Bill Sirois, senior manager at RTD, to provide you with an update on all things related to the Northwest Area Mobility Study, or NAMS. You know, this is a very important regional transportation consensus building endeavor that was approved by the RTD board back in 2013 and supported by all of our local government elected officials. And it defines the short, near, and long-term regional transportation priorities for the Northwest region. There are many pieces and parts of this planning work, which are moving forward at different phases of development. So we're pleased to have Chris and Bill to give us a quick thumbnail overview on all of these efforts, which are critically important to our advocacy work for this region. So welcome, Chris and Bill.
Yeah, good morning. Audrey, could you or Christina pull up? Thanks. Okay. Yeah, as Audrey indicated, RTD in conjunction with the local government stakeholders, CDOT and Dr. Cog, conducted the Northwest Area Mobility Study, also known as NAMS. We finished that in 2014, and the intent of that was to come up with, determine a list of project priorities, recognizing the fact that RTD has not been able to implement the rail in the Northwest area. Next slide, please. So it's via a consensus statement. Stakeholders identified what the highest priorities for the Northwest region would be. And I'll go through each one of these and then I'll follow up with what the status of those are with a little bit more explanation. But in very general terms, the priorities were identified as followed. Completion of the remaining US 36 BRT commitments, the establishment of a BRT network in the Northwest region along the arterial streets, addressing the I-25 reverse commute, and I'll talk again more about that in just a moment, and then also exploring implementations for implementation strategies for establishing the Northwest Rail. Next slide, please. So going first to the completion of the US 36 commitments, interestingly, when Fast Tracks was approved by the voters back in 2004, the US 36 corridor was the only corridor that did not have a defined scope associated with it. Instead, there was just a dollar amount assigned to the corridor. And the reason for that was when the election happened, CDOT and RTD were working jointly on the US 36 EIS, and at that point, a set of recommendations had not yet been approved. So it was a little bit open-ended on what ultimately the BRT should look like on the corridor. So as part of NAMS, we worked to determine all of the BRT elements that the stakeholders would like to see. And since that time, the only remaining elements that were on that list that have not yet been implemented are as follows. First one being, if anyone uses the US 36 Sheridan Park and Ride, you know that to get from one side of the highway to the other, there's that long circuitous kind of spiral ramp that goes up. We've gotten a lot of complaints in the years over that, and so the stakeholders identified as that is one of the items they would like to see improvements on. So we are in the process right now of finalizing design to get elevators established at the station. I think the design effort should be completed later this year with the intent of getting construction going next year, just because of the fact that our requirements are fairly strict on what our elevators look like because of security reasons. They all have to be glass. We do expect it to be kind of a long lead item before the elevator cars are going to be ready, but the hope is that we will have that completed sometime next year. Another one of the outstanding items on 36 is the relocation of the Church Ranch boarding platforms. When the platform location was first determined, RTD had parking that was much closer to where the platforms are. When we had leased spaces kind of in the front of, I'm not even sure what the plaza is called at this point, but we had leased spaces in the front. We were able to obtain a park and ride, a permanent park and ride in the back behind the plaza, but that greatly increased the walk distance from where the parking area is to the platforms. So one of the items identified in NAMS was, would it be possible to shift the ramps so that they would be closer, a little bit more to the north and west, closer to the parking area for easier accessibility. We did get some grant money a few years ago to get moving on implementing that. It's turned out to be a little bit more complicated effort than anyone had originally anticipated. So it was a project that we've had to put on hold for the time being, but it's obviously something that's still recognized as a priority. And when we were able to either get a little bit more funding or somehow change the design parameters, the intent, of course, would be to get that established. And then lastly, the only other remaining item on US 36 would be the construction of a parking structure, a parking area on the opposite side of the existing Broomfield Station Park and Ride. So that would be on depending on your orientation, either the north side or the east side of the existing station. Right now, we've been currently monitoring the parking utilization on the west side, on the main side, the Broomfield side, determine what are the levels, what is the demand, and should they get high enough, then we will start looking into the establishment of the additional parking on the other side. And I want to note also that one of the advantages of having parking and better accessibility on the other side is just for anybody that is on the east side of US 36, much easier accessibility for them than having to go all the way over 120 to come back down to the park and ride. So next slide, please. The second priority identified by the stakeholders, as I mentioned, was the establishment of BRT in some of the primary corridors in the region. The highest identified or highest prioritized corridor was State Highway 119 between Boulder and Longmont. Quite a bit is in fact happening there. As many of you may know, back in November of 2019, we, RTD, in conjunction with CDOT, Dr. Cog, and the local jurisdictional stakeholders, completed a planning and environmental linkage study. That was signed off by FHWA and FTA jointly, which was the first joint PEL in Colorado back in 2019. Currently, CDOT has picked up the reins on that, and working again with local governments and RTD, CDOT is beginning the design work for the highway component of the corridor, which would work obviously the trunk line between Boulder and Longmont. And then there's also several other project elements associated with the main project or the vision that came out of the PEL. And that includes a bikeway between Boulder and Longmont, which Boulder County is currently starting the design on that piece of the project. City of Boulder is also working on 28th Street business access turn lanes, very similar to anyone who's familiar with Denver, Broadway, Lincoln, where we have a bus lane, but that can also be used for right turns only. Then City of Longmont is currently working on the design for the Kaufman Street busway, and that's a component that came out of the PEL as well, which would allow bus lanes on Kaufman Street, roughly between First Avenue and approximately 8th. And then RTD is working on the station design component for what the stations, especially in the cities, and then and along the highway piece would look like as well. So next slide, please. And then on some of the other corridors, 119 is the furthest along of far and away of all of them, but State Highway 7, there's been a considerable amount of work that's been done on that, starting back with Boulder County completing a BRT feasibility study in 2018. And then a station area study was done in 2019. And currently, as Director Liu mentioned previously, the CDOT is now working on the preliminary environmental engineering for the corridor, and money has been allocated for the mobility hub, which would be located at State Highway 7 and I-25. So quite a bit of effort going on there, probably the furthest along after State Highway 119. And then on US 287, Boulder County is currently leading an effort to determine the feasibility of BRT in the corridor. And then on State Highway 42, Louisville and Lafayette jointly have teamed to create a new planning effort, which is titled Future 42, and that is pretty much just gotten underway this last spring. Next slide, please. On the I-25 reverse commute, anyone who has taken the bus between Boulder and Denver during the peak period, if you're going in the reverse direction, so that is to say, if you're heading from Denver to Boulder in the AM peak, or conversely heading from Boulder to Denver during the PM peak, you know that you have a fantastic ride along US 36. You are in the managed lanes, cruising by all of the congestion until you hit I-25, and then you're in the general purpose lanes with the rest of the traffic and the congestion. One of the things that NAMS had identified was looking into the possibility of whether a bus on shoulder lane could be established on I-25 between where US 36 comes in, and then where the bus lane exits at roughly Park Avenue to get to Union Station. At the time, a very high-level analysis conducted during NAM seemed to indicate that it might be possible to utilize the shoulders on I-25 without any major construction. However, CDOT did complete a bus on shoulder feasibility study back in 2017, determine whether or not that would be possible. What they found was it wasn't going to be quite as easy as we had originally anticipated, given the number of on and off ramps, the lane configurations, and some of the right-of-way constraints. They found that it could be done, but the cost would be considerable. So based on the current traffic projections and the current congestion, they didn't believe that it would at this point be, or in the near term anyway, that it would be cost effective to do that. However, the study did leave it open-ended in the sense that they intend to keep monitoring congestion levels to see how things play out, so that if congestion does worsen more than originally projected, then at a certain point it might make sense to revisit that issue. So next slide, please.
Chris, in terms of a time check, I have about 5 minutes left
Oh,
for
yeah.
two of you
Okay.
on the agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, and okay, for them, most importantly, Northwest Rail, which Bill Sirois is going to talk about in just a moment. The stakeholders indicated that that was still a very important component of the regional transportation for the Northwest. And with that, I will hand off to Bill.
Thanks, Chris, and I will go over this very quickly. I will kind of try to skip through. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So just so everybody understands what the Northwest Rail peak service plan concept that we are currently looking at basically is 3 trips in the morning and 3 trips in the evening between Denver and Longmont. It does utilize the existing B-line corridor between Denver and Westminster. It takes about between 60 and 70 minutes to do. And currently we're looking at diesel technology. Next slide, please. This just is a very high level indication of all the kind of the different things that we need to look at as part of this project in terms of moving forward related to coordinating with BNSF, a lot of stakeholder outreach, different levels of planning, and you know, various other issues that we need to address. Next slide, please. So in April, our board made a commitment to move forward with a study, a PEL study on the Northwest Rail Peak Service Plan, basically committing staff and funding to do so. That is a process that we're in the middle of now. We are in the middle of the development of the RFP, and we expect to get that out hopefully in September, with the idea that we get a consultant on maybe by the end of the year, and then complete that in about a 2-year period. Next slide, please. So this gives you an indication, and like I said, we're hoping to get a consultant on board before the end of the year, and then within 2 years have this study complete. Next slide. So this gives just an indication of kind of some of the key issues that need to be addressed as part of the study related to ridership modeling, travel time, some other things. I think the main point here is that we want to get everyone on the same page, but I think there's been some disagreements in terms of the information that we currently have, and some of it's outdated that we need to update related to Northwest Rail, and this gives us that opportunity to do that. Next slide, please. So here's some of the project characteristics, and I'll skip to the next slide just to get us through this. So we have been working with stakeholders over the past few months to kind of refine the scope of work for the PEL study. We've also been working on an MOU with the Front Range Passenger Rail. And like I said, we hope to get this RFP out in late summer, and then, you know, kick off the process really next year primarily. Thank you. Next slide. So here's the last slide in terms of study deliverables. You know, some of the key questions that we want to answer as part of this is, you know, what are the kind of the risks or mitigation to building and operating the service? What are the community impacts? An update on that. Again, the information that we have is we need to update in terms of some of the planning and design work, updated capital costs, operational costs, and then refining those operational characteristics in terms of travel time and other various operational things. So with that, that was a very quick overview, and I didn't know if there's any time for a question or two before we go to the next agenda item.
Thank you, Bill and Chris. We appreciate you providing this update. There's just a lot going on, as you're hearing from both RTD and CDOT, related to regional transportation planning for our region. We're grateful that the RTD board did approve funding to update the PEL, recognizing it's a decade old. So it will be extremely valuable information for all of us. Councilmember Peck from the city of Longmont just made a comment that I was curious if you could provide an answer to. She said the time frame for travel from Longmont to Denver with a stop in Broomfield now takes close to 2 hours. The one-seat ride was eliminated. I wasn't quite sure how to respond to that one, so I'll toss it to you, and then we'll move on to our next agenda item. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just take it at a very high level. I know that there were some changes that we had to do associated with our pandemic. We call it our pandemic run board in last April. There were some unfortunate things that we had to do. I can take this back to our service planning folks who are going to be much more familiar with this to confirm and maybe reach out to Councilwoman Peck just in terms of, if she has any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Bill and Chris. We appreciate your work on this, and we'll look forward to participating in this work coming up here next year. Now we'll turn our attention to a regionally significant land use and transportation planning development opportunity, which the Louisville City Council is currently considering, Red Tail Ridge 2.0. Commuting Solutions member Brue Baukol Partners purchased the 392 acre parcel from Phillips recently and is requesting approval of their general development plan. As one of the largest economic development deals in the Denver metro region, we're really fortunate to have a private sector partner who has made multimodal transportation planning and regional collaboration a cornerstone of the proposal. Please welcome Jordan Swisher, Senior Vice President with Brue Baukol, to provide us with a summary of this exciting opportunity for the Northwest Metro region.
Thank you, Audrey. I also have Jay Hardy, is an SVP with Brue Baukol that's also here with me. He'll be speaking in part as well to the plan. And, Audrey covered a lot of it. I was going to do some highlights over the property itself. It's located at the intersection of US 36 and Northwest Parkway. And we are now the owners as of December of 2020. And we were in the press about a year ago for the plan, which we called, really was Red Tail Ridge 1.0, which was a much more dense mixed use plan with Medtronic as a corporate acre and Erickson Senior Living, and then a mixed use district. And we were unsuccessful. And so we really took to heart everything we learned in the public process and the input from the community, and really took a new lens and started afresh with our land planning efforts. And that's really what's become what we've coined the plan for Red Tail Ridge 2.0. Audrey said, we were approved by Planning Commission, and we are now in the midst of our city council hearings. So Christine, if you could move on to the next slide. The most important revision or takeaway that we had from the community was, our prior program really went beyond the guidelines of the comprehensive plan. And it was very clear from the community that we needed to go back to the core policies that were guiding land use policy in the city. And so with that, Red Tail Ridge 2.0 is a predominant, it's a commercial development solely now, and is much lower in density. So really it's went from being 5.6 million square feet to now 3.1 million square feet. And we can go ahead and move on. Next slide. So it's this is a multi-tenant campus vision. We aim to create an innovation hub that fosters collaboration, provides new public amenities, embraces sustainability, and honors the natural beauty of the site. And what you have here is some stock imagery of the different opportunities and pockets and highlights that we would hope to see at the Red Tail campus once it comes to fruition. And this is a little bit hard and abstract, and so we have some renderings. If we want to go to the next rendering, we can see what we're hoping to develop. This is a view of the north. It's from the northeast corner of the site. So we're looking at Campus Drive. Campus Drive is a roadway that intersects with 88th Street today currently, where Avista Adventist Hospital is located, as well as the Monarch School campuses. And this road dead ends, and we would be proposing to extend it and link it to 96th Street, which creates a really important east-west thoroughfare. And this is the western view from that extension that we would be creating. And Jay will talk to the details, but since we're looking at this visual, complete streets and multimodal aspects were very important to our entire land planning process. And so what you'll see here is we have large multi-use paths flanking the roadway. We have buffered on-street bike lanes, the landscape medians for separation. Our drive lanes are actually narrower for traffic calming efforts. And we have you'll see one reflected here, a pedestrian underpass that really allows for safe passage for trail users beneath of Campus Drive. And so that's what we're really looking at here in this image. And then the subsequent image is, Christine, is the main entrance. So turning towards, now we're on the southeast portion of the site. This is where the old front door to Storage Tech was. It's at the intersection of Northwest Parkway and what was formerly Tape Drive. And you'll see here, this would be, again, multimodal streets, extension of multi-use pathways. That the bikeway in the forefront here on the left will continue on to connect to the US 36 bikeway. And really the emphasis on our planning was biophilic design. So really connecting people with nature in every way that we can. And so that's really the takeaway or the aim for what we're showing here. And I will go, if you package it, all together, this is our global, conceptual plan, which is, as I mentioned, just over 3.1 million square feet. It's office, industrial, and retail and uses, so commercial only, and is just about half of what we had previously proposed. We also have extensive green spaces, open spaces, and a trail network that you'll see here. And I'm going to hand it over to Jay to speak more to the infrastructure element of our program.
Great, thanks, Jordan and Audrey. I appreciate the opportunity for us to be able to present to your collective group and team. If we can go to the next slide, please. One of the things that was really important to us as we went through our program and revisioning this, and actually this was part of the original vision, was how do we interconnect and really open up this site that's really been, if you really think about it, locked down since Storage Tech was even built in the 70s, really has not had access to it. So what we're looking at here is a plan that incorporates over 6 miles of additional trails. Anything that's in a dashed line there is part of our new trail system. And then you can see where it connects into many of the existing trails. So we're really excited to open up this property to the community and be able to allow for the community to be a part of this project, not just be able to look at it from a distance. Next slide. So one of the things that is also very important to us that we've spent a lot of time on is our sustainability. And what we did is we took the city of Louisville and what their sustainability plan is and really created many of the same categories. So you can see these different categories. I'll point to the one in the middle in transportation and mobility, but these are not, some of them started out as goals, but in our GDP, these are actually commitments. So we've got 30 different very strong commitments, that are various levels of sustainability in all of these different categories. So I'll talk a little bit more about transportation here in the middle, but you can see some of the ones that we were making a commitment to from the very beginning. Next slide. So talking about the TDM and the demand management strategies, this is obviously a big part of what you do, and we certainly enjoy having your logo right in the middle of our presentation, and it has been for the better part of 2 years. But pointing out just a few of these because it's important, to this group, and it's really important to us as a developer to make sure that we're doing this the right way, and not the right way for today or tomorrow, but looking really out 10 to 20 years and making sure that our commitment is strong. So we talked a little bit about the trails, both the connection to them, and then both internal and the regional trails. Hiring a transportation coordinator, we think it's very important to have somebody waking up every day worried about how do we make this improvement. And some of the partners that we heard from earlier with CDOT and RTD, we want to be in a direct communication pathway with them, as well as the Commuting Solutions group. EcoPass discounts for employers, employees, van pool, carpool, the parking will be, limiting that to the minimums that the city has. And then also we have opportunities in sponsorships, and then partnering with others in terms of funding for a shuttle. So these are some of the examples of those commitments that we're making up front. Next slide. So roadway infrastructure, obviously this is a big part of our program. And I think, what we really wanted to focus on here is really just to show how this development is paying its own way and advancing the vision of the region, as well as the city. Much of the infrastructure will be built in this very first phase, which we're hopeful will be starting at the end of this year. All of the trail network that I outlined previously will be done in the first phase, including 2 pedestrian underpasses, which are not only critically important for safety, but also quite expensive. But we know how important it is to the community, as well as just the safety of the transportation. Jordan mentioned the connection of Campus Drive. So that's really the east-west connection. The main door that she also showed you that vision of, and then a lift station to support all of that. So that's really a lot of the on-site elements that we're doing. There's also a series of off-sites that are more regional in nature. And if we go to the next slide, one of the important partners that we've had in this is really our eastern edge is the Northwest Parkway. And so we've worked very, very closely with their project team, really trying to understand what are, with the impact of all of the development there, but then ours as well, what are the necessary improvements? So what we have is we have a short-term set of improvements that will be done again in this first phase. And I won't spend the time going through all of those, but it's in our plan and program. And then really a longer-term conversation with the Northwest Parkway, as well as CDOT and Highway 36 and Louisville and Boulder County. There's so many partners that are at our edges. So that will come together in the form of a memorandum of understanding. And then obviously we have Broomfield right across the street on the east side. So we're working hard to do the short term and then the long term improvements as well. I think that's our last slide, if I remember. Yeah. So we're certainly available for questions, and we do have a continued meeting within our city council process that is tonight. So hopefully we'll continue to work our way through this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan and Jay. Great job. Thank you for that thumbnail overview. I know this has been a long time in the making, and we're excited to see what the Louisville City Council, how that discussion continues tonight and going forward, and excited to bring forth first and final mile connectivity, TDM, all of the regional transportation planning to improve access to this important activity center in our corridor and region. So thank you. All right, well, our last guest joining us here is my colleague, Mike Silverstein. He is the Executive Director for the Regional Air Quality Council. And last month, Mike has been very gracious with his time and joined us several membership meetings to keep you apprised of a consideration of an employer trip reduction program in order to help the Front Range address the air quality conformity needs as mandated by the EPA. I will just turn it over to Mike and skip the intro that I had provided or written down for myself, and just allow him the opportunity to provide you with an overview of the current conversation about the employer trip reduction program and what might possibly come forward in terms of a voluntary program. So Mike, welcome. And we look forward to hearing your presentation today.
Good morning, Audrey, and hello, everyone. And just a time check, Audrey. How much time do I have here?
Thanks for asking. You have about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
I can, you know me, I can talk for way longer than that. So I'll keep it to the time frame. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting today. I appreciate it very much. And the Regional Air Quality Council is the lead planning agency for the Front Range region. And our job is to help educate and inform the citizenry of air quality issues, and to also help develop recommendations and implement programs that improve air quality. And the ETRIP program, as it's referred to, Employee Traffic Reduction Program, was brought forward as a proposal by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment after a long stakeholder process that was initiated by the Regional Air Quality Council. And so the Regional Air Quality Council, or the RAC, framed the ETRIP proposal, and the state advanced it to the Air Quality Control Commission. And this was a long process, about a year in the making, of stakeholder engagement to come up with what we had thought was a flexible approach to reducing single occupant vehicle trips for those that commute to and from work. And so the first kind of element, and this slide here kind of bullets off the significant elements of the proposal, was that goals would be established to reduce single occupant vehicle trip reductions in the beginning, basically to skip one trip a week, and then a few years later, the goal would be that each employee would skip 2 trips a week, and in any way that they could. Now, the requirement was not on the employee, but it was on the employer to develop a plan that encouraged employees to find alternative ways to get to and from work besides driving alone. And one of the elements that was really the only certain cost of the program, and definitely a requirement, was that large employers would have to staff up, basically have a designated person or a contractor or a consultant organizing efforts within that work site to encourage the employees to take advantage of alternative ways to get to and from work. And all of the planning requirements were flexible approaches, but were not mandated. So there was not a mandate that every employee had to ride the bus or join a carpool, or employers had to charge for parking. Lots of information was in the media that was just not accurate. So really the requirement of the proposed rule was that the employer was to develop a plan, get approval of that plan by the state, and implement that plan over time. And how would you measure success? Well, surveying was the tool. So it wasn't really a typical state regulatory framework where an inspector would be out there counting, how many cars come into the parking lot and are people carpooling or not. It was really determined by a survey that would occur on an annual basis to determine if the goals were being achieved, this 1 day a week or 2 day a week across the work site. So if one employee was, riding the bus every day, they would count 5 trips, basically not driving alone, and could more than make up for an employee that was driving alone every day. So there was just, it's really a worksite average that was being proposed, and that the state was not intending to enforce this the way they would enforce most every other regulation, with a permit and then compliance and maybe penalty provisions for non-compliance. But basically it would be good faith efforts would be determined if a large employer was complying with the survey requirements, putting together a plan, encouraging action. That was the compliance approach, and there was not a penalty or a notice of violation that would be issued. So that was how the rule was structured. Next slide. And what the RAC really encouraged and appreciated, which we helped develop, was many alternatives to developing and implementing the plan. So if the initial surveys showed and continuing surveys showed that, hey, a large employer is doing this work already, and the drive rates were being achieved, they didn't have to have a plan or have a person on staff. They just had to maintain these annual surveys to determine if those drive rates were in compliance. So basically it's hey, we're doing it already, you don't have to do any more. The other approach was that if you simply didn't want to do this was not something that you felt you could comply with, you wanted to spend the money on, but you could find another way to achieve similar reductions. A plan could be proposed to the state, and with approval, you could do something else that achieved those same emission reductions. And the emission reductions per 100 employees is not great when you count how much emissions a typical commute trip generates. And so you could find other ways to achieve these emission reductions that I've listed them out here at estimates of the ozone precursor and greenhouse gas emissions, that you'd have to find another way to reduce. And so they could be through modifying your process at the work site, whether it's through manufacturing or commercial or industrial operations, or even your fleet of work vehicles. Whatever plan could be put together to achieve a similar reduction would be okay. Next slide. So this all went to the Air Commission, the Air Quality Control Commission, earlier in the spring for consideration. And about a month ago now, or maybe it's not that long, maybe 3 weeks ago, the Air Division determined that they were not getting the support of the regulated community, those large employers, that they thought was important to advance a rule to the final consideration by the Air Commission. And so the Air Pollution Control Division has requested the Air Commission cease consideration of the proposal. The approach that the administration has taken was that it didn't enjoy the committed support that was necessary to make a new program like this successful, and that they would focus instead on voluntary efforts going forward, and that they were requesting that the commission dismiss action on this program. So next slide, please. The withdrawal of E-Trip, as it's being phrased, is basically going to be considered later this week on Thursday at the Air Commission's August 19th meeting. And if the Air Commission dismisses this action, E-Trip will no longer be in the regulatory context and will remain voluntary. And there are intentions to put together an intensive voluntary approach, that builds on what is happening right now and has been happening for many years. And so I'd like to continue this conversation now from the perspective of the Regional Air Quality Council. And so, as I mentioned, we were partners with the state in bringing this rule forward. And when the RAC board met last week and determined that it was not appropriate, or 2 weeks ago, excuse me, that the Commission cease consideration, and that the board felt that continued consideration of the regulatory ETRIP program was appropriate and has requested such consideration by the Air Commission. Next slide. So regardless of how the Air Commission decides whether to continue the rulemaking and the discussion on a mandatory program or vacates the hearing, and then we're back into the voluntary approach, the RAC will continue to focus on what it's always focused on, intensifying the voluntary or, if appropriate, the mandatory effort to reduce vehicle trips in our region. Continue to develop innovative voluntary and mandatory emission reduction measures, and deploying incentive-based emission reduction programs. Next slide. So there's a whole list here, and we don't have to go through them in great detail, but I'd like to bring those to the attention of the group here this morning, that there are numerous incentive-based emission reduction programs that can achieve as much or more emission reductions as a regulatory ETRIP program. And all it takes is money, well, just like everything else, resources to expand programs that the RAC and other organizations are working to expand throughout the region so that we gain these emission reductions that we need to comply with ozone standards and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve our climate. And so there's a long listing here of initiatives that we'll continue to focus on at the RAC to raise money, raise resources for, and deploy these programs up and down the Front Range. And so we're always looking for support from the community, whether it's financial support or implementation support for all of these kinds of measures. And this is just our list, and there are many other lists out there that could be funded. Next slide. And so a great example is our Mow Down Pollution program. This is our lawnmower incentive program where you recycle an old gas mower, we give you $150 off a new electric mower, and we're partnering with Home Depot at this time, but we're looking at expanding to other retailers as well. And so all it takes to achieve what ETRIP would have required for every 100 employees complying with the rule is simply 33 gas mowers going electric. And so for $5,000, that's the cost to get the $150 incentives to the citizens so they can recycle that old gas mower and go electric. We can achieve those same reductions. And so it's really not that hard. It's just, it takes resources to do. And so we'll continue to intensify our fundraising efforts to expand this offering and all the offerings that we have at the RAC, and partnering with other organizations to incentivize the emission reduction programs and then, potentially avoid the regulatory efforts. Next slide, if there is one, that might be it. I think that is. So I'd be happy to answer or address any questions you might have about the ETRIP program and the process with the Air Quality Control Commission, the RAC's position, and our incentive programs, if we have time, Audrey.
Yeah, I asked if there were any questions to be added to the chat, so I don't see any currently, Mike. I took advantage of the mower program a few years ago, so thank you for that. I love my electric mower. I highly recommend the program. We do appreciate the RAC board's support of ETRIP and, asking the Air Quality Control Commission to continue the conversation of a mandated ETRP. I mean, metro areas across the country have programs just like this in place. And so while it may be delayed now, we hope that there will be continued efforts to strengthen a voluntary program in the meantime, but work towards, a more meaningful trip reduction program, as organizations like Commuting Solutions and, Dr. Cog have been working on voluntary efforts to reduce travel demand already for decades. And so we can only get so far without more money and policy support. So recognizing that there aren't any questions, Mike, thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing what the commission decides later this week and how we move forward as the Front Range to address air quality. And we do have a minute. Could you briefly update us on the status of the EPA attainment? We are recently moved down to severe in terms of air quality conformity. So could you give us a quick update on that?
Oh, sure thing. You know, as everyone knows, our air quality is not improving. In fact, these past few summers, you know, we've really suffered through, you know, some serious air quality issues. This summer, especially with the ozone levels and the smoke that has been transported into our region from our neighboring states, and some local smoke as well. So, you know, we can't do much about that wildfire smoke from a you know, a local perspective. We can, you know, improve our long range climate to reduce that, but in the near term, we need to comply with air quality standards, and ozone is our standard that we're in non-compliance for. You know, other areas have smoke impact and they don't violate the ozone standards. And so we can't just say it's ozone. Our ozone problem is due to wildfire smoke, because it's not. It's a contributor, no doubt, but and a driver of high ozone on some days. But the majority of the time, our ozone is homegrown, and we are being downgraded to a severe non-attainment area by the EPA for failing to attain air quality standards on time. Ozone is better than it used to be 20 years ago, but we've pretty much leveled off in our improvements over the last 5 years or so. And so we're in a position now that we're not complying with ozone standards. We're not protecting public health. And so EPA is obligated to downgrade us to the next worst classification of severe. And that, of course, gives us more time to put together another plan and implement strategies to gain compliance. But it also requires tougher measures to go in place. So to get to compliance, the older ozone standard and the newer ozone standard, which is even tougher, we have to do more. And so we'll be presenting an updated ozone plan to the RAC board and the Air Quality Control Commission a year from now that will contain additional mandatory strategies that are either federally driven because of the severe classification, or strategies that are necessary to further reduce our own emissions and bring us to compliance with the ozone standards in the right time frame. And so that work is underway now, and we have committees at the RAC and also activity with the State Air Division to evaluate new strategies that have not been implemented yet. And we will be working those through committee, looking at cost and benefit issues, implementation issues, legal issues, to determine what suite of strategies we need to bring forward. And those need to include strategies that reduce mobile source emissions from our transportation network, whether vehicles themselves or the vehicle miles traveled that we all drive. And so all of that is underway, and we'll be working with all of you to come up with the right mix of strategies a year from now to bring back to the Air Commission.
Thank you, Mike. Well, this has been a very good agenda to talk about pollution reduction as it relates to CDOT, multimodal transportation regional projects in the NAM study, you know, sustainable projects like Brue, Baukol, and Red Tail Ridge 2.0, hopefully coming out of the ground, including multimodal and complete streets, and our regional air quality and nonconformity. So all very important topics for the day. That's the end of our program. Thanks again for joining us. We would like to once again thank our sponsors. The event today is presented by Boulder County. Our gold sponsors are the Colorado High Performance Transportation Enterprise, Elevations Credit Union, the Northwest Chamber Alliance, Google, and the RTD. The rest of our 2021 sponsors can be found on the screen. We have a few upcoming events and announcements that we wanted to share with you here today. Bike to Work Day is a month away, and we're excited that it's back. The last one was in 2019. Our regional goal is 15,000 participants compared to 32,000 back in 2019. So do join us. Commuting Solutions will be hosting stations and helping others to welcome cyclists on this important day to celebrate cycling throughout Colorado. Our last Colorado 119 membership meeting for 2021 will be held virtually on September 28th. And we're pleased to announce that our 5th Sustainable Transportation Summit has been scheduled for October 28th at the Origin Hotel in Westminster. This will be a hybrid event taking place in person at this newly opened hotel in Westminster's new downtown, as well as online. So we hope you'll join us then. And you can always stay plugged in with us through our newsletter, Up to Speed. So on behalf of the Commuting Solutions Board of Directors and staff, have a great day. And thanks so much for engaging in the transportation momentum for the Northwest Metro region. Bye.